jump into one of my favorites. He's a guy I love to hate, Larry Kudlow. Larry Kudlow, Mister. The pandemic is gone during the pandemic. So Larry Kudlow, here's his take on the recent jobs report.
Folks, economic storm clouds are gathering, and that's the subject of tonight's riff.
Oh, God.
So, yesterday, Fed Head Jay Powell issued pretty clear forward guidance that the central bank will start cutting its policy rate in September, and additional rate cuts might well occur in November and then December. Wall Street has been whining and panting for these rate cuts for about 2 years. So what does the stock market do? As Jerry Willis just reported, it got slammed down. Especially the high-tech NASDAQ lost almost 3% of its value, but the S&P 500 and the Dow got whacked hard as well. So what is going on here? Well, as I've often suggested, market bond yields are frequently more important than the Fed's target rate. And while the Fed has done nothing yet, most Treasury yields are down about 100 basis points in recent months. In other words, markets have been leading the Fed. And here's another key point. Lower market interest rates are surely a welcome development, yes, indeed, but the history shows that declining interest rates are also a recession indicator. And even though GDP has been growing at a sort of semi-stagnant 2%, a bunch of other indicators are flashing much bigger warning signs about the economic outlook. As Jerry Willis mentioned, today, for example, the reliable manufacturing report from the Institute of Supply Managers registered another deep dive, and they've dropped.
So let me boil this down for you. So Larry Kudlow, shocker, is predicting a recession. So, just to remind all of you guys, Larry Kudlow, all of 2023 said there was going to be a recession. Then it didn't happen. Right? All of 2022 said there was going to be a recession. Didn't happen. Prior to that, back in 2020, during COVID, said, oh, no, there's not going to be a recession. Then there was a recession. So, the guy has never been right about this. So, if you want to talk about indicators of a recession, if Larry Kudlow says there's going to be a recession, there's probably not going to be one. Just historic indicators.
But indicators suggest that if Larry Kudlow says this is going to happen, that's not what's going to happen.
Right.
Expect the opposite.
What he's talking about, so the main indicator, he's talking about interest rates goes down, sometimes that could lead to a recession. Well, no, typically what happens is interest rates are a response to loosening labor market, right, and lower wage growth and things like that, which can tend to be the recession. But the actual act of lowering the interest rates by the Fed is a response. It's not a headwind indicator. It's a lagging indicator. It's not a forward indicator. So if you're talking about interest rates in general have kind of gone down in the bond rates because people are, demand has gone down a little bit. Well, part of that's because they've kept the interest rate so high. Why would I buy a longer term bond, right? And when I can buy a shorter term bond and get a higher interest rate, right? Why would I take on the extra risk? So that's kind of what's going on. The other thing about it is he's talking about the SOM roll, which we've talked about a couple times before, where they always say, okay, if unemployment jumps, whatever it is, 0.5%, every time there's been a recession, that's happened before it, right? But the catch is that you have to understand the logic of it. It's an if-then statement, right? If there's a recession, then the SOM rule is true. 100% of the time, that's been the case. But that doesn't mean if the SOM rule kicks in where unemployment jumps significantly, that there's going to be a recession. Because there's plenty of times where that's happened and a recession hasn't followed it. So it's one of those things where, yeah, typically recessions are preceded by these things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that these things are indicating a recession. And I don't know where he's getting that from. I mean, I don't know what would be kicking off a recession at this point. I mean, what's the catalyst factor here? I mean, is there something going on in the news where people just aren't working, or there's strikes, or, you know, is there a shortage in supply or something that I'm not aware of?
Is he? I mean, the only thing that I can think of is really just based on, the history of the duration of time we tend to have between recessions.
Yeah.
This is one of the longer stretches we have gone without going into at least a, brief recession.
We've had a couple brief ones, but they're so brief you don't even notice them.
Yeah. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of, though, just because, like I said, we tend to, like, if you kind of look at historical data for when we're in recession, we usually don't go more than a certain period of time without having one, and we've gone a kind of a little longer, arguably. And so I wonder if it's kind of like it's time for one, without actually following any like other predictors other than that usually every whatever amount of time we have this. That's
Right.
The only thing I can think of, which is not really great data. It's just sort of like,
Yeah.
kind of finger in the wind predicting,
And we had that for a while. What was the 7-year rule? Because there was the brief one in like 94, and then 2001, and then 2008, and then but there wasn't one then in 2015. So it's kind of like,
I mean, so like loosely, I feel like what I've heard is like 10 years, like, every 10 years or so, there's at least one within a 10-year span, like that sort of very loose,
sure,
sort of estimation. But you can't just say, well, it's been 10 years and we haven't really had one yet, so we're clearly lined up for one, if there's like not really any other indicators,
Well, right. And if you're talking about it, like you said, it's probably going to be a blip on the radar, if anything. Like even the last sort of recession, where Kudlow was wrong and said it wasn't going to be a recession, I would even argue in his favor that it probably wasn't really a recession, because the Treasury basically dumped $1 trillion into the stock market to keep it from being a recession. So, yeah, it had all the green lights of a recession, but it didn't have any of the real effects. So, whatever it is, I mean, I would point this out, though. Every recession, you can go back in history, we can point to an explanation of why it happened. We can explain the housing crisis. We can explain COVID. We can explain 2001 with the market problems and the dot-com burst, right? But what is it now that's bursting that everything's so dependent on? I just don't see it. Once again, Larry Kudlow predicting a recession, but historically when he does that, nothing happens.
Right.
When he tells you there's not going to be a recession, then there's usually a recession that follows pretty shortly. I mean, I just think it's funny. You get one bad jobs report. It's not even that bad. It's just not good. In what, years? And Larry Kudlow's screaming recession. I mean, he's freaking Chicken Little. I mean, the sky's falling. But remember, kids, this was the guy that told you that COVID was over in March of 2020 when COVID just started. So, our favorite Larry Kudlow, God, when is he just going to have a heart attack? Please. I'm tired of this guy.
All right. I know you don't believe in spirituality, but be careful, Duncan. There's karma. If you go wishing heart attacks on people, I don't say I didn't warn you.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll have a heart attack then. Anyway, moving on. So,
yeah, then I'll have to say, hi, Gossip Finance is currently on hiatus because Duncan gave himself a heart attack by thinking bad thoughts. And go. And the cheeseburger didn't.
Yeah, the cheeseburgers don't help. Yeah.
The cheeseburgers didn't help.
See, the evil cheeseburger has done its work. Let's see.
And Larry Kudlow.
Yeah, Larry Kudlow. Raising my blood pressure. So moving on. We talked.
And then sending you cheeseburgers.
Yeah, pretty much.